There's this classic move, almost like a strategy card from an old history book. Centuries ago, the British used it really effectively.
Navigation acts, right?
Exactly, the navigation acts. The goal was simple. If you want to trade with us, you use our ships.
Yeah.
Anyone else, well, you pay.
A brutal way to control trade flows and crush competitors like the Dutch back then.
Totally brutal and effective. I was reminded of this, actually, when the U.S. announced its new port fees set to start October 14th. The logic felt, well, identical.
Targeting specific ships?
Yeah. Target Chinese-owned ships, target Chinese-built ships, slap them with fees so high, we're talking potentially millions of dollars for a single visit, that you essentially try to choke their industry and maybe revive your own.
It does sound like a classic power play, just updated for the 21st century.
It really does. But then, almost immediately, like before the ink was even dry, China's Ministry of Transport puts out its own notice. And it was. Well, it's basically a carbon copy. Starting the exact same day, October 14th.
No coincidence there.
None at all. Any ship built in the U.S., flying a U.S. flag, or owned by a U.S. entity would face the same kind of special fees.
Wow. Perfect tit-for-tat replication.
Perfect. That anything you can do, we can do too logic. But here's the thing. That was just the first shot.
So there was more.
Because on the same day, the Ministry of Commerce, MOF.com, dropped 7 more notices.
7.
That immediate, really calculated move on shipping fees was quite the opening salvo, showed they could react instantly.
Right. Operational capability demonstrated right off the bat.
But our mission today, really, is to move past the noise of port logistics, the ships and fees, and dive deep into those 7 other announcements, notices 55 through 62, that MOF.com dropped on October 9th, 2025.
Because this wasn't just about reacting to the U.S. fees.
Exactly. This felt like something bigger, a comprehensive, coordinated, strategic move. It marks really the most sweeping expansion of China's high-tech export licensing regime we've seen in years.
Yeah, striking right at the core of advanced global manufacturing.
So it's much more fundamental.
Absolutely. When you analyze these 7 measures together, you quickly realize you can't view them as just isolated trade disputes, little spats over tariffs or quotas.
They're more than that.
Much more. They are instruments of state policy, designed fundamentally to safeguard China's national security and its core industrial interests.
So a strategic shift.
A major strategic pivot, yes. It shows this unwavering commitment towards securing technological sovereignty, across key sectors. The whole paradigm has shifted.
From reacting to controlling.
Exactly. From reacting to external pressure to proactively controlling the critical intellectual and material components of the global supply chain.
Right.
And that forces competitors to really rethink their own manufacturing independence.
Okay, let's unpack this shift then. We're moving from, million-dollar fees on container ships to the microscopic but maybe infinitely more valuable world of high-tech materials.
Foundational materials.
Right. Essential for global advanced manufacturing technological innovation. So what exactly is covered under these MOF.com notices? They fall under China's export control law and the regulation on the export control of dual-use items, correct?
That's the legal basis, yeah.
So what's the strategic scope? What are they actually targeting?
Well, the scope is intentional and it's massive. It really aims to control an entire industrial ecosystem, not just, isolated resource streams.
An ecosystem.
Yes. We're seeing comprehensive restrictions placed on 4 critical areas. First, high-value rare earths and their magnets. Second, specialized superhard materials. Third, critical battery components. And fourth, and maybe most importantly, the proprietary technology used to process all of them.
The know-how.
Exactly. It's a truly integrated control effort.
Okay, let's start with rare earths. China has, long held a dominant position there, but often the focus seemed to be on just raw mining output. What did Notice 57 target that suggests a more focused, high-value approach this time?
Notice 57, yeah. It went after specific rare earth metals and alloys, and the list is highly targeted. It covers 11 specific metals: dysprosium, terbium, holmium, erbium, thulium, ytterbium, samarium, gadolinium, lutetium, scandium, and yttrium.
That's quite a list.
Yeah.
Any pattern there?
Definitely. If you look closely, you see a strong focus on the heavier rare earths elements like dysprosium and terbium.
And why are those significant?
These are not your general purpose commodity items. They are absolutely foundational to high performance specialized components. Think military applications, high-power lasers, high-efficiency permanent magnets.
Magnets used in.
The most sophisticated wind turbines, advanced electric vehicle motors. By controlling these specific high-value elements, China ensures it has leverage over the most advanced end-use manufacturers globally.
Okay, so Notice 57 hits the specific metals. What about Notice 56? That connects the raw materials to manufactured goods, right? Ensures the control doesn't just stop at the ore.
Precisely. Notice 56 extends that control downstream to the vital products made from those metals, permanent magnet materials, and the powders used to make them.
Ah, the intermediate goods.
Yes. These engineered components are absolutely essential for manufacturing things like the motors for electric vehicles, a huge global market where efficiency is key, and also high-efficiency wind turbines, specialized miniaturized electronics.
So controlling the materials, the powders, and the resulting magnets.
Means controlling the output of some of the most advanced manufacturing sectors worldwide, sectors where performance hinges directly on these specific magnetic properties.
Right, that covers clean energy, high-power electronics. But Notice 55 hits a different but still critical high-tech sector. Synthetic diamonds and super hard materials. Why focus on that specific niche? What's the importance there?
This is really about precision, ultra-high tolerance manufacturing. Think particularly chip production, but also defense industries.
How's that?
Well, Notice 55 explicitly restricts synthetic diamond and other super hard materials. That includes the powders, single crystals, wire saws, grinding wheels, the stuff used to actually work with advanced materials.
The tools of the trade, essentially.
Exactly. These are the industrial workhorses used to cut, shape, process next-generation materials like advanced ceramics, specialized alloys, and crucially, the notice also controls the specific production equipment. It lists DC plasma CVD equipment.
CVD, chemical vapor deposition.
Right. So it's regulating the fundamental tools, the actual processing environment needed for cutting-edge industrial fabrication anywhere in the world.
Okay, moving on to batteries.
Yeah.
The absolute heart of the new energy economy. What did Notice 58 specify about lithium-ion and graphite components? How does this secure China's dominance in that area?
Notice 58 focuses squarely on securing the integrity and the technological advantage of the lithium battery industrial chain. It placed restrictions on high-energy lithium-ion materials and, very importantly, artificial graphite anode materials.
Anode materials. China's big in that, aren't they?
Dominant. They currently dominate the global processing and supply of these specific anode materials. And this move comes just as the EV and grid storage markets are exploding globally.
And performance hinges on these components.
Directly. Battery performance, especially things like charging speed and energy density, it hinges directly on the quality and the formulation of these specific components. So by regulating the export of these key materials, China really solidifies its irreplaceable position in the whole new energy value chain,
making it incredibly difficult for competitors to develop independent, high-performance battery supply chains.
Extremely difficult, yes.
Okay, so we have the raw materials covered, the magnets, the precision tools, the battery components. That seems like comprehensive material control. But you mentioned the notices went a crucial step further, targeting not just the what, but the how.
Right. By restricting the actual processing technology.
Notices 61 and 62. These seem to wrap up the entire industrial chain into this new regulatory framework. Why is controlling the technology, the knowledge, more strategic, perhaps, than controlling the resource itself?
That is probably the most significant piece of this entire puzzle, because it reveals a fundamental strategic shift. They're moving from mere resource control, which, by the way, is historically difficult to defend at the WTO.
Right. We saw that before with rare earth.
Exactly. They're shifting from that to technological control. Notices 61 and 62 cover rare earth processing and separation technologies. This includes detailed specifications on extraction, smelting, metal production, magnet manufacturing processes, the whole workflow.
So the recipes.
Essentially, yes. Yeah. Controlling the technology, the intellectual property, the expertise, it means that even if another country, say, finds a big new rare earth mine somewhere,
they still can't process it efficiently?
Not efficiently, not cost-effectively, not without accessing Chinese technology or know-how or spending years and billions reinventing the wheel. By controlling the specific technologies and their carriers, the knowledge base itself, China establishes control over the entire industrial chain and the technological ecosystem,
creating a massive barrier to entry for anyone trying to build an alternative supply chain.
A very high barrier, yes. Now, when we really analyze the legal and strategic depth of these new controls, Maybe the most striking feature is the systematic application of extraterritorial jurisdiction.
Extraterritorial jurisdiction, that's a huge term.
It is.
Meaning China is attempting to regulate how these materials are used,
Yeah.
even if they are processed or incorporated into products outside of China. That's a powerful tool.
Extremely powerful, and it signals this fundamental realization. To really secure technological sovereignty, control has to extend beyond your own borders.
Okay, how are they legally executing this? And you mentioned mirroring. What U.S. rules is this similar to?
Well, they're applying Article 49 of their regulations on export control of dual-use items, and this seems to be the first time they're doing it in such a systematic way against this specific industry.
And what does Article 49 allow?
It extends the license application obligation to foreign organizations and individuals exporting rare earth-related items that were produced overseas.
Okay, produced overseas, but using Chinese
What?
input.
Exactly. And why is this so significant? Because observers, analysts, they believe this indicates a major strategic step to explicitly mirror the U.S. Export Administration Regulations, or EER. Specifically, two really potent parts of it.
Which are?
The Foreign Direct Product Rule and the de minimis rule.
Okay, let's break that down for listeners. The U.S. Foreign Direct Product Rule, the FDP rule,
Yeah.
that's the one famous for being able to restrict global chip sales to specific companies, like Huawei, right? Even if the chips weren't made in the U.S.
Correct, as long as they relied on certain U.S. technology or software in their design or manufacture.
So if China is mirroring this with rare earths, what's the practical implication? How does their version work?
The implication is potentially profound. The FDP rule essentially says that U.S. technological input kind of follows the product wherever it goes globally. China's mirroring action seems to apply that same principle, but to its rare earth processing technology.
The tech covered in notices 61 and 62.
Precisely. So if a foreign company uses Chinese rare earth separation technology, that crucial know-how we discussed, or if the final product contains a certain threshold of Chinese components derived from that tech.
They need a license from China, even if the factory is in, say, Europe or Japan.
That's the implication, yes. They would need to seek an export license from MOCOMA.
Wow. Did they also introduce a quantitative rule, like the U.S. de minimis percentage, which sets that threshold?
They did. This round of measures includes what's being called a Chinese version 50% rule within their licensing policy.
50%.
Yes. Now, the U.S. rule often sets thresholds lower than 50%, sometimes 25%, or even 10%, depending on the item and destination. But China choosing 50%, well, it clearly establishes the reciprocal intent.
So if a foreign product uses materials or components that originated with 50% or more Chinese technology input, or maybe if the product itself is deemed essential to China's core interests,
that foreign entity must seek a license from MOFCOM. It's a calculated regulatory expansion designed to maintain leverage over how their materials are integrated into crucial global manufacturing.
okay, that establishes broad control over the supply chain. But Notice 61 also details something called a case-by-case approval policy for specific, highly sensitive applications. This sounds less like broad resource control and more like targeted strategic counterpunching.
I think that's exactly what it is.
What technical nodes require this special approval, and what does the precision of the targeting tell us?
This specific policy, yeah, it feels like the most direct reciprocal countermeasure in the whole package. It uses China's clear advantage in the rare earth industrial chain to target the exact strategic fields, semiconductor manufacturing, and advanced AI development that are, frankly, vital to its competitors.
And the specific nodes are?
Laid out with chilling precision. 14 millimeters and below logic chips, 256-layer and above memory chips, and artificial intelligence with potential military applications.
14 nanometers. Why specifically 14 nanometers? That sounds familiar.
It is entirely calculated. Those technical specifications, the 14-millimeter logic chips, the 256-layer memory chips, they are almost identical to the core content of export controls imposed on China by the U.S. Bureau of Industry and Security in recent years.
This is a direct mirror image.
It appears so. By targeting these specific high-end nodes, China is signaling very clearly, any attempt to restrict our access to advanced semiconductor and AI development will be met with commensurate restrictions on the critical high-value materials needed by those same industries globally to manufacture those very chips.
Calculated leverage, using their strength in rare earths to directly challenge their competitors' goals in advanced chip making.
Precisely.
And notice 62 seems to reinforce this by creating a kind of catch-all clause for rare earth technology control. preventing Chinese citizens or entities from helping out overseas without permission.
But that's another critical piece of regulatory reinforcement. Yes. Article 7 of Announcement No. 62 explicitly prohibits Chinese citizens, legal persons, organizations from providing any substantial assistance or support for overseas rare earth activities.
Activities like
Mining, smelting, separation, metal smelting, magnetic material manufacturing, even rare earth secondary resource recycling and utilization activities, basically the whole chain, conducted overseas. You can't help with that without MOFCOM permission.
And the penalties are presumably significant.
The potential punishments under Chinese export control regulations are quite severe, yes. This just reinforces the comprehensive nature of the control. It's industrial, it's technological, and it's also behavioral. It aims to prevent the free flow of crucial expertise that could potentially enable a competitor to build an independent supply chain.
This high level of coordination we're seeing, the synchronized port fees, those 7 detailed MOFCOM notices, the immediate mirroring of foreign product rules, it really brings us to China's broader whole-of-state approach. It seems clear that the government uses, well, all available levers. It intentionally blurs the line sometimes between state institutions, companies, academic establishments, even ordinary citizens, all to achieve national strategic goals.
That's a fair description.
What does that whole-of-state action look like in practice, especially when dealing with trade challenges or perceived provocations?
Well, it means that state resources, information, influence are all mobilized to achieve these national economic and security objectives. The method itself is often described as opaque, informal, applied behind the curtains.
Hard to pin down.
Exactly. This covert characteristic is often deliberate. It makes these actions extremely difficult to challenge effectively in international forums like the WTO.
Why's that?
Because the government rarely, if ever, acknowledges the deployment of the measure or the clear link between that measure and the perceived national interest it's protecting. It's designed for plausible deniability on the global stage.
And the targets of these economic actions, they vary, right, depending on whether they're trying to influence a foreign government or perhaps punish a specific company.
Exactly right. When targeting foreign companies, the measures most frequently used seem to be popular boycotts. These are highly visible and can be very effective.
Were they spontaneous?
Rarely appear to be fully organic protests. They are often orchestrated or at least amplified via state-controlled social media, the press, television, really leveraging nationalist sentiment.
Can you give an example?
Sure. We've seen this tactic deployed, for instance, against brands like H&M and Adidas over their public stance on Xinjiang labor concerns, or against high-end fashion brands like Versace and Givenchy over perceived territorial identification issues on T-shirts, for example.
And the result?
Often swift, public apologies from the companies. The economic pressure exerted by potentially, 1 billion consumers acting in relative unison is immense.
Okay, that's targeting companies. What about measures against foreign governments?
Measures against governments tend to be more targeted and trade-related. They're meant to disrupt trade flows and restrict foreign access to the very valuable Chinese market.
Like what specifically?
Things like rapidly raising tariff rates on specific goods from that country, selectively applying domestic and international regulations like suddenly imposing very strict phytosanitary measures against agricultural imports, effectively blocking them, refusing licenses that are vital for operation, or even imposing unofficial embargoes where goods just stop clearing customs.
Is there a recent example of that?
The case involving Lithuania is often cited. After Lithuania allowed the opening of a Taiwanese representative office in Vilnius using that name,
Which Beijing objected to strongly.
very strongly, Lithuania effectively found itself excluded from the Chinese customs system for a period. It demonstrates that immediate and decisive action against a government decision viewed as compromising China's core sovereignty interests.
Now, the European Parliament and others often categorize these kinds of coordinated tactics as economic coercion. They argue China uses economic means to achieve political goals. But your analysis suggests China has also strategically adapted its methods over time. Can you elaborate on that learning curve?
Well, the term economic coercion is certainly the term used by Western entities, and the European Parliament does note the EU itself is a frequent recipient of this kind of pressure. However, it's really essential to highlight the context here, which includes China's strategic adaptation.
How so?
China learned a hard lesson, arguably, early in its WTO membership regarding overt trade restrictions. You might remember they lost 3 major WTO cases brought by the EU, Japan, and the US regarding rare earth export restrictions back around 2014.
Right, those were about export quotas and tariffs.
Exactly. Things that were relatively easy to challenge under WTO rules. After losing those cases, China shifted its focus entirely.
So they learned that simple quotas and tariffs were vulnerable and changed strategy.
Precisely. They moved away from methods that directly violated their WTO accession commitments and shifted toward areas where potential infringements of WTO rules are, frankly, less clear-cut or harder to prove.
Such
as technical export controls, dual-use item regulation, broad supply chain prohibitions justified under national security exceptions. These make the legal challenge infinitely more complex and much slower for opponents to mount successfully. The technical precision we see in these MOFCOM notices, 55 through 62, I think, reflects this learning curve perfectly.
It's interesting, too, to compare the language often used to criticize these Chinese actions versus the language used when other countries employ similar tactics, often under the banner of, say, national security.
That's a very relevant point.
For instance, just days before these MOFCOM notices dropped, the U.S. blacklisted 19 Chinese firms.
Yes, October 8th. The U.S. Commerce Department added those firms to the entity list. The stated reason was their alleged involvement in sourcing drone components, potentially including U.S. parts or technology, for groups like Hamas and the Houthis.
And how is that viewed in the context of this back and forth?
Well, the analysis and some of the source material we looked at suggests this move was seen by some observers as clearly political theater, using it as a pretext, perhaps, to smear Chinese firms and potentially escalate the trade conflict.
Right.
The consistency of the accuser's logic is certainly questioned in some analyses. One source drew a rather sharp parallel, suggesting sarcastically one might as well sanction Boeing for the planes that hit the Twin Towers, arguing the connection or responsibility for downstream misuse is similarly tangential.
That's a provocative comparison. But it highlights the perception that when an enemy moves first, whether it's with port fees or blacklisting firms, China's action is framed, at least by them and some observers, as simply measured and decisive counterpunch rather than initiating the conflict.
Indeed. This counterpunching approach seems to reflect a strategic principle often summarized as, don't move unless the enemy moves. When they move, we react decisively. For China, this decisive reaction is framed as necessary to safeguard what it views as its core national interests, territorial integrity, state sovereignty, and economic development, particularly in these critical high-tech fields.
Okay, so the complexity and the sheer scope of China's coordinated controls. We're talking synchronous port fees, advanced material export licenses, the whole package. It means that global responses, especially from Western nations, probably can't just be rhetorical statements.
Unlikely to be effective if they are just rhetorical, yes.
They seem almost forced to fundamentally restructure their industrial policies, their supply chains, really aiming for greater strategic autonomy.
That seems to be the direction of travel.
So what is the expected structural reaction from Washington specifically to these comprehensive MOFCOM controls?
Well, the anticipation is that the U.S. reaction will be deep, it will be expensive, and fundamentally structural. It's likely to accelerate that long-term goal the U.S. has stated of building a self-sustaining critical materials economy, one that's independent of China.
Driven by the realization that dependence is a vulnerability.
Exactly.
Right.
That dependence is a strategic vulnerability. This strategy seems to have 2 major intertwined pillars.
Okay, pillar 1.
First, a renewed and probably accelerated push to diversify supply chains through alliances.
Building partnerships.
Yes. Washington is expected to really ramp up efforts to source critical minerals. This means scaling up existing initiatives, perhaps like the Quad Critical Minerals Initiative, or pursuing new legislative action. There was mention of the proposed Critical Mineral Security Alliance put forth by Senators Cortez Masto and Hagerty. The idea is to create a secure collective supply chain among trusted allies.
And presumably other countries are interested too.
Oh, absolutely. The U.S. isn't operating in isolation here. Other nations affected by China's near monopoly in some of these areas are also aggressively seeking new partnerships to mitigate their own risk.
Okay, so alliance is pillar 1. What's pillar 2?
Pillar 2 is restoring self-reliance through massive domestic industrial policy support.
The America First industrial policy angle.
Essentially, yes. doubling down on that by bolstering American mining and processing companies that are ideally 100% independent from China, particularly for things like rare earths and specialized alloys.
And how do you achieve that?
The government's expected to rely on both trade barriers and massive public and private financing policy levers. The goal is to ensure these domestic producers can get capitalized and remain competitive against potentially heavily subsidized foreign rivals.
What specific trade mechanisms might they use to protect these nascent domestic industries?
While we can certainly anticipate increased tariffs on Chinese critical and strategic material imports, the analysis we saw explicitly points to the likelihood of new Section 232 investigations into critical minerals.
Section 232. Remind us what that is.
Right. A Section 232 investigation determines whether specific imports pose a threat to U.S. national security. If the Commerce Department finds that they do, it provides the legal basis for the president to impose targeted tariffs or quotas.
Designed to support domestic producers.
Exactly, to shield them from predatory pricing or import surges, making them focused instruments of industrial policy.
In the financial side of this whole shift, trying to build strategic autonomy across the entire value chain. That must be immense, the cost.
It is truly enormous. Strategic autonomy doesn't come cheap. But public funds and private capital already seem to be mobilizing.
You mentioned J.P. Morgan.
Yeah, consider the analysis mentioning J.P. Morgan's $1.5 trillion Security and Resilience Initiative. That's a massive private sector commitment. That scale suggests a clear market signal, anticipating massive government financing. Think extensive tax credits for domestic production, defense-linked grants, loan guarantees.
So Beijing's actions, in a way, have forced the U.S. to accelerate what it had maybe promised but hadn't fully executed.
That's one interpretation, yes. That it forced the U.S. to accelerate the creation of a truly independent, functional, critical materials economy. The political will might now match the recognized need.
Okay, let's look across the Atlantic. The EU has also been developing its own, quite sophisticated toolbox, specifically targeting what it labels economic coercion. What does the EU's counter toolbox look like? How prepared are they for something like these MOFCOM notices?
Well, the EU is rapidly building its capacity for what it calls open strategic autonomy. Their central legislative tool in this fight is the proposed Anti-Coercion Instrument, or ACI.
Anti-coercion instrument, what does it do?
Its primary design is actually for deterrence, through dialogue, through diplomatic engagement first. But crucially, it provides a legal framework to retaliate with countermeasures if dialogue fails.
What kind of countermeasure?
Covering trade, investment, funding. But as a measured last resort, the key word there is measured. The EU generally wants the capability to respond effectively without unnecessarily escalating the situation.
Are there broader efforts alongside the ACI to make the EU less vulnerable in the first place?
Oh yes, the EU's toolbox is becoming quite multi-layered. It includes several complementary regulations, things like the Enforcement Regulation for Defending General Trade Interests, the International Procurement Instrument, or IPI.
What's the IPI for?
That addresses asymmetric market access, particularly in public tenders, trying to level the playing field if EU companies are shut out of foreign government contracts. There's also the FDI screening framework to identify foreign investments that might pose a risk to security or critical supply chains.
And critically, regarding materials.
Yes. Crucially, there's the proposed European Critical Raw Materials Act. This sets specific domestic targets for the EU for mining, for processing, for recycling, designed to dramatically lessen the EU's dependency on single sources like China in vital material sectors, particularly rare earths and battery materials.
So similar goals to the U.S., building domestic capacity. Are these regional responses, the U.S. and EU efforts, being coordinated, or are they working separately?
No, they are definitely coordinating closely. Economic coercion is a major priority for the EU's Trade and Technology Council, the TTC.
Okay.
Both the EU and the US explicitly intend to use the PTC platform to discuss potential coordinated or even joint responses to economic coercion that affects them or their allies. They are actively trying to align strategies, build more resilient global value chains by diversifying trade, recognizing, I think, that only a unified structural response might be effective against China's highly coordinated whole-of-state strategy. #tag outro.
So if we try to synthesize everything we've covered today, that synchronized opening shot on shipping fees followed immediately by those sweeping, incredibly detailed 7 MOF Kapaluz notices, It really does demonstrate a major structural shift, doesn't it?
It really does.
This doesn't feel like clumsy retaliation. It feels highly capable, unified, like a learning system in action.
Agreed.
China seems ready and able to apply specific, reciprocal, and strategically deep pressure across global trade and technology supply chains. And using its strength in materials and processing technology is a key geopolitical lever.
Absolutely. That immediate calculated reaction on the port fees, paired with the sweeping, structurally parallel export controls, it confirms, I think, a new era, an era of proactive counteroffensive strategy from Beijing.
And the effect.
Well, this calculated move immediately forces the world's most powerful economies, particularly the US and the EU, to fundamentally invest in the strategic autonomy and supply chain resiliency that, frankly, they had previously acknowledged was necessary, but often delayed. Delayed perhaps due to cost, complexity.
But now the pressure is on.
The pressure is definitely on. China's response is, in essence, a powerful statement, it says. Attempts to gain leverage against our core industrial and technological interests will be met, not just rhetorically, but with complex, coordinated, and scalable institutional action that mirrors the challenger's own strategy.
A new architecture for global economic competition.
I think that's a good way to put it. This is the new architecture of global economic competition. And it fully embodies that strategic mindset we talked about, the one often seen in the sources. Don't move unless the enemy moves. When they move, we react decisively.